from that age, honestly, it's like all sports quite cutthroat within a team environment, I feel, because you're judged against your peers, and you're not stupid. You're aware of situations. You're like, oh, he's picked up a contract. He's picked up a contract. Oh, he plays my position. He's picked up a contract. And like you hear Chinese whispers about who's getting the next contract and what's happening here. And the more you kind of don't achieve that, it probably plays in your head more, and then you can try harder, or your head goes another way and you start to resent coaches, or you start to resent yourself, or you have all these thoughts and things in your head which in essence don't benefit you really in any way. So it's all these sort of different things, and I guess as a young mind, it's how you sort of deal with a lot of that rejection. You can go one way and go, right, okay, it's his fault, and shut it off and go away from it, which probably I did to an extent, and nearly walked away at one stage. And then probably through my diagnosis.
The Inner Game Podcast, brought to you by the Science of Excellence. Presented by Rob Hume, the leading elite athlete mental performance coach. Unleash your power.
Welcome onto the Inner Game Podcast. We have Robbie Ferguson, who is joining us this evening. Robbie is a international rugby union player. He plays for Great Britain, represented Great Britain in the recent Olympics, captain Scotland in the Rugby Sevens. He's currently playing for Glasgow Warriors, and today he's coming onto the show to talk about his life, his story in sport and outside of sport. And I know that anybody who is watching this is going to really be able to resonate with some powerful messages which comes from the trials and challenges which Robbie's been through. So thank you again for coming on the show.
No, thank you very much for having me.
So yeah, could you explain to us again just how your journey into sport began, and what was it that attracted you to that white oval shaped ball many years ago?
So I was just at a sleepover, primary 5, had sort of started a new school, and was at my mate's house throwing a rugby ball about. Never really paid any interest in rugby. It was always football for me before that. And my mate's dad was the coach of the sort of youth team, coached his son. So was like, "You're coming along." He saw I was quite fast at the time. He's like, "You're coming along." So I went for a couple of weeks, got smashed about by some big boys. Did not like it, but my sort of mum and dad were like, "Oh, persevere, you stick in." So persevered for another few sessions, and then something just clicked. We started playing games, started scoring tries, running with the ball, figured out how to stay away from the big guys, and kind of sparked a bit of interest in sport after that.
Nice. So could you walk us through kind of your progression, how you managed to go up through the levels from being a junior, making it through? I know you represented Scotland at the junior age levels as well, didn't you? At the 15-a-side version of the game. And how's your progression to get to back then, starting out playing then to where you are now? How does that look?
Very up and down, to be honest. I think everyone thinks you go from point A to point B and it's a smooth track all the way, but so I was very lucky that my local club, the Ayr, were one of the best sort of amateur teams in the country as such. So I played all the way through to under 16. I think I made my debut for the first 15 in what was the old Scottish Premiership when I was 17, which was fairly unheard of for someone that young to be sort of playing, but a coach took a bit of a chance on me, an opportunity, and I played sort of really well throughout the back of that, which resulted in me then tying up with the Scotland under 18s team, which again was a different environment and probably one where I didn't perform all that well to the level of certain players, things like that. My club form was probably better than what it was internationally, where I was playing with older players and things like that. So that was a bit of an interesting one. I was sort of seen as this next hot shot at 17, 18, and then got put in amongst my peers. It never really happened for me, which was straight at the back of that, went back to my club team again. Ayr played really well again for them. We won the Scottish Cup and the Premiership double, which again was pretty unheard of in the club game. Like, was a big deal at the time. And again, through the back of that, went into the under-20s programme. Did 2 Six Nations, 2 under-20s World Cups. But I think for me, looking back again, I probably underperformed a little bit within that sort of environment, whether that was the pressure of it or whatever that was at the time. For me as like a young man, I probably didn't perform that well, which at that stage boys are being offered professional contracts, academy contracts, things like that. So that part sort of passed me by a little bit, and there was a sort of stage where, right, probably pro rugby might not be for me at this stage, which was like, again, tough to take at that age when I had sort of a big reputation, sort of growing up from the club game, and kind of failed to put it into progress internationally, and then obviously wasn't getting the recognition through contracts and clubs and all that sort of stuff. So probably had a year to myself where I went to uni and was just playing for my club team, at which stage I obviously got a diagnosis of cancer in amongst this sort of period. So I'm 20 years old at the time, which maybe opened my eyes to a lot of different things. But out the back of that, I had refocused, and I got an opportunity to join up with Glasgow, sort of contract, kicked on from there and managed to get myself an academy contract, and played a few times for Glasgow in 2015 when I was 22 at this stage. Went on loan after that down to London Scottish, just because the amount of international players and the player pool in Scotland. So did 2 years down in London, which was sort of me breaking out of my comfort bubble and going somewhere different down to London. And then a year later ended up joining up with Scotland Sevens, and from there never thought I would be a sort of Sevens player at the back of that. I had 4 probably of the best years rugby wise, going to comms, Olympic Games, World Cups, competing in the World Series, getting to captain the team, to then sort of culminating to go back into the 15s game at the end of the Olympics in 2021. It was 2020, 2021. It was the Olympics. But so yeah, that's sort of the brief. Like I say, it was kind of up at the very start, and I was the next big thing, and probably didn't deal with that well, and sort of crashed down. And then I had a bit of a refocus, and it probably helped me just to get everything in line and help me kick on a little bit to sort of where I am at the moment.
Yeah. And do you think that is there a chance that, obviously, as you were saying, you was building this reputation from such a young age, was it maybe a case that there was just a little bit too much came a bit too soon for you, that you couldn't quite handle maybe the expectation with it, or was there anything like that was playing at that time, do you think, when you look back at that?
I'm not sure if it was that, or it was when I was playing with the older players. I think they took some of the responsibility and the pressure of being like, I wasn't the big player within that. I was just a young player who was expressing himself and kind of carefree and wasn't having to think about the bigger picture. Whereas when you then went into sort of the age grades amongst my peers, I was probably thrust into more responsibility, which maybe transpires into more pressure and different sort of things come to the floor then. And maybe that just added to I don't know if it was stress, I don't know what it was at the time, but yeah, potentially something I didn't cope with that well at that stage of my sort of career as such, and maybe found that difficult being where I was there to my role within the age grade environment.
Yeah. And did you, was there a point in amongst that where you was thinking, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to make a life and career in rugby? Did that kind of come into your head at all?
Yeah, I think from that age, honestly, it's like all sports quite cutthroat within a team environment, I feel, because you're judged against your peers, and you're not stupid. You're aware of situations. You're like, oh, he's picked up a contract. Oh, he plays my position. He's picked up a contract. And like, you hear Chinese whispers about who's getting the next contract and what's happening here. And the more you kind of don't achieve that, it probably plays in your head more, and then you can try harder, or your head goes another way and you start to resent coaches, or you start to resent yourself, or you have all these thoughts and things in your head which in essence don't benefit you really in any way. So it's all these sort of different things, and I guess as a young mind, it's how you sort of deal with a lot of that rejection. You can go one way and go, right, okay, it's his fault, and shut it off and go away from it, which probably I did to an extent, and nearly walked away at one stage. And then probably through my diagnosis of the cancer and how I approached my treatment, I kind of applied that then to sport and my own head, and then things sort of became clearer for me, and pictures became clearer, and I probably had a better understanding of, I don't know, situations, or a better sense of what was important, what wasn't important, and things like that.
I think because we've touched on it a couple of times, I think I was going to leave it a little bit later on before talking about it, but I think now would be a great time to talk about how that actually was, for you. When you was you 20 when you got the diagnosis? Was it lymphoma, Robbie?
So was 20, and something you didn't really ever expect to hear or whatever else. But again, it didn't make sense at the time, but looking back now, it made sense on a few things for me that were holding me back from a sporting point of view. I couldn't get any bigger. I was feeling unfit. I was getting this and that, and basically ended up getting diagnosed with 2 tumours, one in my throat and one in my sort of chest. And basically the resultant one, it found, because I fainted and wasn't feeling well, the tumour was getting so big it was compressing my windpipe. So I was struggling to breathe, trying to do sport and all the rest of it. So I don't know how long that went on for prior to me realising it, or how much of an effect that had on things. But it was a scary time, but I think I learned a lot from it. And it's one of those things that, looking back now, if it hadn't happened to me and I hadn't had to deal with that situation, I don't think I'd have gotten as far as I am in sport, because a lot of what sport is resilience to an extent as well. And that taught me a lot of lessons and a lot of resilience and a lot of sort of good practice, I think, to implement into sport. How
if you could go back to, those early stages, when you were diagnosed with it, how did you handle that? And then, how was it in those hours, days after that? And then how did you then start to straighten out your mind, if you like, to start to deal with it? So I guess there's 2 things there. What was it like initially? Like, what when you get hit with a sledgehammer like that? It's a big thing to take, obviously.
We'd been searching for a diagnosis of what it was probably for about 3 months. And eventually I get called by my GP, can you come in? Yeah, came in. And at the time I was 20, I was living at home. My mum was on holiday, and it was just me and my sister in the house. She's 2 years older than me, so it was just the 2 of us in the house. So I went to the doctors by myself, and basically went in, sat down, and the woman, there was a lady at the time, was sort of chatting to me, and she said, "Oh, you've got this sort of black mass around your scan here. It's really quite nasty. It's lymphoma, blah, 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 blah," telling me all these sort of things. And as a 20-year-old, I'd never heard of lymphoma in my life, didn't know what it was. So I've just turned to Ben, "Oh, what's lymphoma?" And she's like, "Oh, it's a type of cancer." And I've just been like, as soon as you hear the word cancer, you're like, "Oh, gee, like what?" And at that point, you're just sort of left speechless. And she hands me a few leaflets, and she's like, "Oh, I've passed your stuff over. A specialist will be in touch with you in the next day or so." So I'm walking out of this GP appointment with my leaflets and no idea how I'm going to phone my mum and tell her, because they're all obviously waiting for this diagnosis. We've been trying to get it for ages. So I didn't know what to do. Kind of got in the car and had a minute of just like almost disbelief about what was happening, and just couldn't really take it in. And I was like, "Do I phone my mum?" I was like, "I'm not phoning my mum." I didn't want to pass that news to her. I didn't want to pass that news to anyone. So I went home, and my sister sort of greeted me at the door, and you know that way, someone that knows you knows when something's wrong. She's looking at me and she's like, Rob, what is it? And I was like, I don't know. Like, we're still sort of struggling to speak. I just sort of handed her the leaflets, and then she was just like, I just remember her running upstairs crying. And then obviously she's phoned my mum started phoning me, and things have sort of spiraled into, I think everyone's general reaction is panic, like panic. And that probably was the feeling for the next 24 hours or so. But from that diagnosis, I think the next day a specialist got in touch with me. We were straight into the hospital, and I was getting seen by them. They were like, and it was kind of scary how fast it was snowballing, because they were like, right, we need to do a biopsy to find out what it is. The biopsy could be a little keyhole in your neck, or if we can't get a good enough sample from there, we'll need to get you in for surgery, crack your ribs open and get into the big one, which is like major surgery. So I'm in my head now thinking, I've been told this yesterday, you're telling me I might need major surgery tomorrow. I was just like, my head was completely spinning. At this point, my mum's still in holiday. She's trying to get a flight home. She's panicking. I was like, oh. So we kind of was going through that. But luckily for me, there was a great guy. Paul was like the sort of head consultant, and he was really good. Managed to get the biopsy done at my neck, which was a huge relief. They diagnosed me pretty quickly, and then within a week, I was in chemotherapy and was getting treated. Like, it was all very, very, very fast. But I remember before my first chemotherapy, I started googling like chemotherapy side effects, what was happening, this was happening, that was happening. The worst thing to do in the world for anyone medically, they'll tell you, is don't Google it. So, but obviously you Google it. But then this was probably the point that got me through in my head and maybe made me realise a lot of stuff. I was sat there with this letter that had 12 chemotherapy appointments, which were lasting about 6 months. And it's one of those things, like, you can look at the outcome and they're like, listen, this is treatable. Like, you're at a stage where it's very treatable. We have high expectations. Like, this is your plan right now. This is where you need to get to. So for me, I sort of broke it down into like, okay, let's not look 6 months down the line. I took it sort of like in little cycles. So my first goal was, right, okay, get the first treatment out of the way. That was like a box ticked. The second one was like, after 3 treatments, I would go for another scan to see how I was reacting to it. So that was like another box tick. And then from then on in, like, chemo is obviously like a sort of cumulative effect. It became harder and harder just because it was getting harder and harder on my body. But I just had to sort of keep breaking down rather than look at the final outcome, just trying to focus on like processes within that and going, right, okay, this is my next process. This is my next little aim. I need to get to my next set of bloods to make sure that I can get my next treatment. And it sort of became a process. And I've probably learned from that process that it was successful for me. And I then maybe implement that process now a little bit in my life, in rugby, in whatever it is I do. Like, don't get too caught up with looking 5 years down the line, looking 2 years down the line. Like, you can have those big goals, expectations, but don't be like, right, okay, hang your hat on whether you make that goal or you don't make that goal. Like, what are you doing potentially day to day to reach that goal? And if you do what you're doing day to day, from my experience, then the end goal sort of looks after itself, was probably my lesson throughout that treatment. So yeah, I wanted to get better. That was my end goal. But like, all I could do was make sure I was doing the right things to look after my body, to make sure that I was able to get treatment every 2 weeks and my blood count didn't drop low enough that they said, listen, no, like, I was like, I'm having these treatments every 2 weeks, so I need to make sure this happens. I need to do this, I need to do that. And it is, again, from a sporting point, again, you tie it back to is listening to your body and how you recover and what you do, and trying to give your body every opportunity to do that. And like I say, if you do these little things, then it usually, not always, but usually means you'll hopefully attain that end goal, which was sort of the lesson I probably took through that and kind of implemented, I think.
Definitely. It's ironically, one of the techniques that I use with athletes in terms of setting goals is, it's so you're almost describing the technique, the process of what I actually teach people. But I actually help them actually create the neurology of what you're talking about, which you obviously did yourself. But if somebody doesn't know how to set a goal properly, it can become difficult to do it. And as you said, you need to have the goals for the future, because something however many years down the line, it's still gravitating us, it's pulling us towards that. But if the attention goes on something that's 2, 3, 4 years away, and you're not present in today as well, you're missing so much from today. And so one of the things that I do with athletes is, again, getting them to find out what people want. But once they've got that, what do you want? What do you want to be achieving? How do you want to be performing, playing? What things do you want from life at year 1, 2, 5, 10? But then take them and take year 1, for example, and then go to the end of that. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? How am I going to be performing? How am I going to be living my life in that way? But then work back, right? A month from that, what would your performance and life be like there, right? What about a month back from that, and a month back from that, and back and back? And as you say, then that gives the mind, a process to follow, right? So I've walked myself back 12 steps, if you like, from 12 months away from where I want to be. And the mind needs to have a process of how is it going to get to there? I can want that thing, but it needs to have, as I say, the plan. And the analogy that I use, it's like having a sat nav, and you sit down in your car and you go, right, I want to go here. Well, where? Where exactly? If you don't put, the postcode in and tell it exactly where you want to go, and then have the route, that car will just drive around aimlessly, and it may hit the target and get to where you want to go, or it may not. And it certainly seems like that you were able to find, confidence and belief in setting these small targets ahead of time. I'm just going to focus on getting to the next target. I'm aware of the next 3, 4, 5, 6 after that, but my goal is getting to this next one. And then once that's done, that's chalked off, right? And the next one is that kind of the process that you developed for yourself, Robbie?
I think so, and it's probably just sort of subconsciously, this is what I mean, like all the I resonate quite a lot with the stuff you say, and the mind and how powerful that sort of is, and it goes a long way. And it's something I definitely didn't realize until going through my treatment. That's why I sort of say to myself, I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't, because when I'm thinking about those junior things again, when I potentially didn't go as well as I would have liked to, in my head, all I wanted was a professional contract. And I probably didn't think, I was just like, why am I not getting a professional contract? How am I not getting a professional contract? Like you say, you probably missed the day-to-day, the learnings, the warm-up games, the training sessions, the opportunities probably to get better and amongst that, because you're so caught up in why is this not happening? And then that can just be quite a toxic thing to have in your head. Whereas if you break it down, like we sort of discussed there, I feel like you get that positive affirmation of, I've got that, right? I've got that. And then it kind of helps you snowball with your confidence in yourself as well.
Yeah.
That definitely is something that I wish, again, like we say earlier within sport, like if this stuff has been chatted to 16, 17-year-old people, how much better is our talent pool for sport going to be without, do you know what I mean? Like there's so much more opportunity within that, I think.
Definitely. The other thing that I'm so, curious to delve into is how did you get to the point where because it's still, for many people, and I'm also saying this because I have a friend of mine who got diagnosed with cancer a few years ago, and he struggled. He struggled to at times find the motivation and belief, to get through it. And I'm just wondering, is there anything that you can think about, or a point where you was able to say, I'm getting through this? Was it like that? I'm going to beat this thing. What was your kind of mentality? How are you processing what was going on, other than the setting of the goals? What was it that you was able to do that could tune your mind into believing that you could get to the other side of it, if that was the case?
I think there was always a feeling in my head that my family were a big motivating factor for me. Like when you see, like I remember vividly sitting in a room with my mum and my dad, and the surgeon was going through everything that was going to happen to me and things like that. And my mum and dad are physically broken into tears. We've walked out of the hospital. My dad's like hugging me, he's in tears, and I'm still like, I would say I'm an over emotional person. I was sort of like stone brick wall, but like I knew, and my mum always said, she's like, "You're better for me when you're back on that pitch doing what you do. You're better for me when you're back on that pitch doing what you do." And like I knew sort of like for them, like it was a traumatic sort of experience for them, and I was like, I want to give them that feeling of like, okay, he's back on the pitch, he's doing what he wants to do. And I always sort of had that image in my head of like, okay, this is me running back out, this is what it's going to be like. And then you have like, okay, what am I capable of doing without having these tumours holding me back, or how long have they been doing this sort of for? So I sort of had this potential sort of image or false dawn of like what I could be or what I wanted to be in my head, and that was what was sort of driving me through it. Because there's, you can't say I didn't sit and breeze through it. Like everybody's going to struggle. Like if someone tells you they're having chemo and they've never struggled, definitely, do you know what I mean? Like it gets you. Like going into the hospital, and again, this sort of spoke to the power of the mind to me. I would, by my 7th or 8th treatment, I was very heavily sick while getting my chemotherapy. And by that stage, you go in and get hooked up to like a saline drip sort of to flush you out before getting your first bag of chemotherapy or whatever I got. And my mind got to the point of, as soon as I was having this saline, I would start being sick, because I just started associating being in the hospital, being where I was, being in that chair, with being sick.
Yeah.
So the nurses were like, we're not even giving you anything yet. That's just water. Like we're literally not giving you anything yet. Like, why are you being sick?
Yeah.
I was like, I have no idea. Like I wish I could tell you why, and I wish I could do it, but this is sort of what's happening to me. And that sort of realization of like, it's going to happen. Like your mind does have these things where it's going to pick up triggers. It's going to do things like that. And even to this day now, like I hate walking into a hospital. Like I still associate, as soon as I'm in a hospital, I'm being sick. It's horrific. But yeah, the motivational thing was some sort of image I had in my head of my family being there, me being back on a rugby pitch, and just being back in that environment and seeing what I could do, I think was my sort of motivation.
Yeah, and that makes so much sense. I've spent a lot of time researching something called the placebo effect, and if anybody doesn't quite know what it is, essentially the placebo effect is all about belief. So, for example, whenever drugs are being tested and trialed before they can go out and come into the market, whatever medicine or medical pill or whatever it may be is being created to cure whatever problem, it has to go up against a double-blind placebo, which is nothing, which is essentially, it could be this tablet to help cure, let's just say, hay fever. Yeah, this tablet's going to solve all your hay fever problem. But before that tablet can get passed, it has to be a placebo pill, which is a pill with nothing in it. And the reason why it has to do that is because that pill with nothing in it literally has the power to cure the body of various different ailments, when that person believes that what is in this pill with nothing in it has the potential to cure them of their problem. And the nutshell of the placebo is all about belief. If when somebody believes something, the mind will attune itself and start creating and changing various different neurological, neurophysiological, different endocrine changes within the body to literally start to prepare the body to get over whatever problem or illness that they're struggling with. And belief is so important. And in the absence of that, whether it's in sport, whether somebody's really ill or whether they're not ill and they're just struggling, without the belief, without having what you had there, which was this image, these reasons why you wanted to get on the other side of it, your family, being, having that in your mind, being back out on the rugby pitch, it was again creating for your own subconscious mind, this is what life is going to look like on the other side of it. And one of the things that there is a book for anybody interested in it called You Are the Placebo, and it's an unbelievable book of stories, science, neuroscience behind people who overcome illnesses when they shouldn't, and they study like how did they do it? How is it that these people that have got over an illness that they shouldn't have done, and what's the difference between those that got the same diagnosis and they didn't make it, and such a big part of that is having what you had in your mind, which is this powerful image of what life is going to be like on the other side of it. And I think, just generally in life, that is so important for people, that you've got to have an image. You've got to train your mind and your brain to focus on what you want. And the problem that people get sucked into is, if things aren't going well, people going the way that they want to, they start to focus on what they don't want to happen. I don't want this, I don't want that. And that happens in sport. They step out on the pitch and they start thinking about not making this mistake. Don't miss that pass. Don't miss that kick. Don't miss this. And when somebody's doing that, all they are doing is ingraining a pattern of what they don't want to happen. Because in order to think about not dropping the ball, unfortunately, the subconscious mind has to create at such a fast speed that you won't consciously be aware of it. But in order to think about not dropping the ball, the mind has to go inside and visualize what that looks like to not drop it. And essentially, then you plant the seed of dropping the ball. And that's why it's so important to, instead of thinking about not dropping it, think about having your hands up ready to receive the ball, whatever sport it is that they're playing. Think about, scoring the goal, seeing it flying in the back of the net, into the top corner, whistling through, in tennis, having that image of what it's going to look like, of serving that ace down the middle, flying over the net and shooting past the person on the other side. And I think that's so powerful, Robbie, that you was able to get yourself and your mind to the point where there's life beyond this, that this is what it's going to be.
Yeah, no, I think you're bang on. And it is interesting. Like, a lot of that does come from sort of that, for me anyway, that sort of positive self-talk as well hits a lot of what you're saying as well. It's easy to go out and think about the mistakes you make, or for me, getting hung up on the mistakes you make and how you can get rid of them out of your head. Like, everyone's going to make a mistake. Don't judge yourself on your one bad thing. Like, judge yourself on your 30 good things you've done in that game, or whatever it is. And I guess these are all things that, again, I've maybe not been coached on, but you just sort of figure out almost on your own as that sort of best practice for you. And the quicker you can sort of figure that stuff out, the more beneficial it's going to be to you as an athlete, as a professional, as a person, I think, as well.
Definitely. I think you said a couple of things there, Robbie, there, which really resonates with me, which about judgment, the judgment of one's self. And I'm somebody who had, as a much younger person, dreams, aspirations of doing things in sport that I never did, and for a while that got to me, because who I was in my younger years was this sportsman, this footballer. That's how I kind of created my identity. I got my self-worth, I got my enjoyment, my pleasure from life was running around on a football pitch, dancing past players and scoring goals. And then all of a sudden, when you don't play well, or when you don't get what you want, what starts to happen is people judge themselves. Maybe I'm not that person that I thought I was. I'm not that good then, or that was a bad performance. And the key to sport, and one of the key things that I really get across and emphasize to the athletes that I work with is that performance, especially during it, there should be no judgment of it. You can spend some time analysing what you're doing after, but never during it, because if somebody starts to analyse emotionally, that was good, that was bad, I'm playing well, I'm not playing well, there will always be an emotional trigger to that. And as soon as the mind gets emotional, it's taking you away from your best performance, because the flow state, which is where the peak performance comes from, is in the absence of judgment. The conscious mind, when there's been a lot of work done on the flow state, and it is a slightly deeper trance state of playing, where almost athletes have an out-of-body experience at times, where time is slowed down, movements are much slower or faster, there's very little thinking. And as soon as somebody starts to think how to play, that's too slow, and I'm sure you'll be able to resonate with that. When you're playing sport, your best performances, you're not thinking about what to do, you're not thinking about what you've been practicing or training. That's done. It's just about getting on the pitch and just letting it flow out of you.
Yeah, this is almost something I maybe learned. I think through sevens, I probably learned this next thing, which has helped me as well, is what you've described there. Is I learned that I almost got better the more tired I got, because I couldn't think as much. So it becomes the ingrained habit, the skill you've learned. Like your body knows it. You've got the muscle memory. You've got everything there you need. But sometimes your brain's the thing that inhibits you from doing the muscle memory. From, like you say, you're thinking about missing the kick. You're thinking, so when you're so tired and you're fatigued, you're not thinking about that. You're just going through what you do. And I probably learned that through sevens. Like, I was getting better the longer the game was going, because I was thinking less and I was just doing my own thing. And I was like, they kind of teaches that, like, don't get in your own head with that sort of stuff, which is at times easier said than done. But that was sort of a lesson for me. The more tired I was getting, obviously physically would be declining, but my performance was probably increasing because of what we were sort of saying there. And it's quite interesting that, because you do, I guess, when you perform, you go there, you will shut things off because your body starts to get into that state of fatigue. But for me, like, it was like, the muscle memory's there, the skill's there, I've practiced that, I can do this. So just go and do it rather than think about doing it, if that makes sense.
It makes complete sense. It's something. One of the other key things, I have eight key kind of factors that I think really contribute towards sporting excellence, and one of them is trust. Trusting yourself. Think about any athlete who's even got to 20 and is still performing at an elite level. The odds are, if you're 20 years of age and you're playing any sport, hockey, netball, rugby, athletics, whatever it is, on average you will have at least started at 10. And if I'm honest, it's more likely been before then. But if you got to an elite level and you're 20, you started at 10, the number of hours that you have put in, every week for those 10 years, going from the age of 10 to 20, that's hundreds and hundreds of hours developing the neural patterns in your mind. And your mind and body, once it's done that amount of repetition of something, it knows how to do it. And as you said there, once you committed to that process of working on your craft, developing, giving time and energy to the thing that you want to get good at, then it's about getting it on the court, the pitch, the track, the pool, whatever it is, and letting that just take over without the judgment of talking to yourself. The self-talk not interferes with that program. And there's this guy who in the 60s called Jose de Silva, who was one of the real pioneers. He's a Mexican American who, for how long ago that was, what he was doing was quite profound, really. He was essentially, he was an electrician, and he became really, really successful, like multi-millionaire. And he couldn't understand that why the rest of his family, his wife, his brothers, sisters, his own mum and dad, and his children, why he was so successful and was achieving all these things and nobody else around him was. And so he started doing his own research on the brain, and he had this theory with him being an electrician. He wondered if the brain was like a circuit, an electric circuit, and electric circuits will have components called resistors, and the resistors are there to reduce the flow of electricity through the circuit. And he wondered if there was things that would go on inside the mind that would reduce the flow of energy. So he started, paying universities to because he had that much money to do this research for him. And long story short, that was the conclusion that he came to, that thoughts, that limiting beliefs in the brain were like the resistors in a circuit, that the thought interrupts the flow of energy in the brain, that somebody who doesn't quite believe in themselves, somebody who has a self-worth issue, that's reducing the flow of energy in the brain, which is ultimately reducing one's ability to express themselves. Because if somebody steps out on the rugby pitch, for example, and in the back of their mind they're not sure if they're good enough, and that is quite often there with some athletes. Am I good enough? Am I good enough to be here? And they're good enough until a mistake comes. Something goes wrong. So they can be flying high and doing great. But if that limiting belief is in the mind for whatever reason, then if a mistake comes, somebody says something, a player, a coach, they make a bad pass, that's enough in that one moment there for everything to change. And that's why it's so important to get control over those thoughts and not be at the mercy of getting stuck in this pattern of self-talk and visualizing and seeing these things going wrong. So it certainly seems, from what you're saying, Robbie, that you've just been able to learn so much from getting beyond the challenge of dealing with cancer and just applying so much into life generally, but then marry it into sport.
Yeah, no, that's definitely been the biggest learning I've had, and why I sometimes say to people it's probably a blessing in disguise what happened, because of the sort of forced learnings you have out of it. And I probably wouldn't have had to have these lessons or learn these sort of coping strategies probably as they were at the time for me. And then once you've got these sort of coping strategies, it's just how you implement them in different areas of your life, whether it could be looking after, I've got like a toddler now, be looking after her, it could be like marriage, it could be work, it could be whatever, it could be sport. Do you know what I mean? Like, I find them quite applicable within any environment, but in elite sport where the mind, I think, has so much to do with it, I think it's definitely enhanced within that area. Definitely. And
the thing which is, just so abundantly clear, which is coming out from your story, Robbie, is that, as you said right at the start, this is not a story of this line upwards. Yeah. And I also work with students in schools and work with talented athletes in schools. And one of the things that gets to me is often how at 16, when they maybe got released from a club or something hasn't quite happened, and then they give up. That one setback is the end. It's the end of the road. And if you stopped at any one of those roadblocks, that stop signs, then gosh, your life would be so different, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It sort of speaks to some. I suppose if I'd asked my teammates sort of a word to sum me up, or sometimes on like a jersey presentation, whatever we're doing, teammates will write like a few words or like a phrase that maybe defines you, and you kind of get it with your jersey or whatever. And like the two ones I always seem to get are like resilience and perseverance. So the two ones that I always seem to get. And I'm like, I don't know if that's the nicest things you could be saying about me, but like I'll take them at the minute. But that's sort of the story of sport. Like I'd struggle to tell you one person that I play with that's just went yep all the way up. And it is about coping with failure, dealing with failure, and how you sort of bounce back from that. Because I think you can see in boys who are more talented than me and could have had bigger careers and done amazing things, but when they just lose the head so quickly, and we can joke about it and all, but it is just somehow how you cope with that. And to tell like a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old that now is hard, and they don't want to hear it, and they'll never, like my little brother will never fail. If you speak to him, it's not in his vocabulary, which is almost like a great thing, that you're bulletproof, like you'll never fail. But that will come around the corner, and then it's interesting to see how you deal with that, or you sort of implement something to deal with that for yourself as well.
Yeah. Can you remember one of your best ever performances, Robbie?
See there, yeah.
What's one or two? What's one which sticks out for you when you think back? Yeah, that game, it all came together for me there. Have you got a memory like this?
There was a game that probably sticks in my head that kind of goes with what we were sort of saying. Is we played first round of the 2018 Sevens World Cup, and none of us were playing well. We were getting beaten 26-0, and there was 3 minutes to go. And for us, we were like for most people, were thinking the game was there. I hadn't actually played that well for the first. I've watched the game back now, and I come off thinking, like, when you've said what's your best performance, that I've said this game, right? And you could watch the first 10 minutes of this game and you're like, this guy's rank, he's awful. But as a team or as individuals, we probably had the best 3 minutes of rugby I've probably ever had in my life. And we ended up winning the game 31-26. And part of that was we scored, and then I was the kicker on the field at the time. So I slotted kicks from the touchline straight back to the restart, put the kick on the money. The boys were getting it back. We score again, straight to me. I hit the kick, 2 more points, back to the middle, restart on the money. We get it back again. And it just, you got in that rhythm and that flow of like this. And like, I felt like I could have stayed in that flow, and we could have beaten them if we give us 10 more minutes by 100 points. Like, we were just in that flow, and I was in that moment. And then, like you said, forgotten about everything else. And I came off the pitch buzzing. Media wanted to speak to you, messages from home, all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, I'm an absolute world beater here. Like, this is phenomenal. Watch the game back, and for the first 10 minutes, I'm sitting there in awkwardness, watching myself, being like, I was absolutely off for the first 10 minutes of this game. But like you say, you have that in your head about how good you are and how good you feel, and it made such a difference. But yeah, that's probably one that sticks out in sort of my head at the time. But yeah, I don't know if it was actually as good as I think it was, but that's something a coach always sort of says, like, you're never as good as you think you are, and you're never as bad as you think you are. Like, you always got to let it settle in for a while.
How do you think that? Well, I'll go back a step there. So one of the things that I do with athletes is in that moment when you were playing in that way, literally your mind is processing, the world in a different way, and what people don't quite realize is that we constantly move from different states of trance all the time. We're not just in the same kind of waking state all day. Just for example, to drive a car, many people will go from A to B, and by the time they've got to B, they will not know how they've got there, because they're thinking about a thought, they're singing in the car, they're actually not paying any conscious attention to A, how to drive the car, or B, where they're going, but they get there safely. And that's just, a prime example of how the subconscious mind, once it's learned a skill, when you let it do it, will just go and do it. But so one of the things that I do is I get athletes to go back and remember, right, how did it look, sound, and feel when you played one of your best ever games? And then how did it look, sound, and feel when you really didn't play like you wanted to? And what will happen 100% of the time, without any deviation from that, is that the memory that they have of their lesser performance versus their better performance, it has a completely different structure to it. And all memories, all beliefs have a structure, and that structure is created through our sensory system. It's created through what we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're feeling, and to a lesser extent, what we're tasting and smelling. So a worse performance which is not as good, literally internally, the picture of that is grayer. It's a grayer, darker picture. It's fuzzier. It's got different kind of the sounds that they're hearing are a different tempo, a different speed. And then, for example, with the better performance, it will be bigger, it will be brighter, it will be more colourful, and those patterns, those structures of that experience is what drives the state. So the more brighter and bigger and colourful a memory is, the more appealing it is. So one of the things that I do with athletes is get them to literally spend time, just remembering 4, 5, 6 of their best performances, and just being in the moment, going back to that and stepping into those memories and understanding how it looked exactly inside the mind, and then imagining themselves performing with taking the memory and the structure of that memory into their future memory. And I'm just curious there, when you think back to that performance, and you did mention how things were just flowing effortlessly. Just when you remember back to it, how does it look to you when you think or when you remember back to that, and what could you hear at that time or in that moment?
The biggest thing that sticks out for me is there was a breaking play almost as we'd score, run the tries. They were going TMO to check, and I was having like a conversation with the physio, and the physio was telling me he's literally, I think it was 24, 26 to them at this point. So I've got this kick from the touchline to level. I think there was about 20 seconds left in the game, and the physios came on with a message and said, the message is you need to get this kick. And I've been like, no, obviously I know that. The whistles sort of went, and it was like a full stadium. It was a baseball stadium in America we're playing, it's full. And I just remember hitting the kick, like, again, I was in quite a focus at the time, like hitting the kick, and then just almost like feeling the crowds, just the energy come from behind me as this like roar went up behind me, because I've like slotted this kick, which just sort of like fills you with that feeling inside of, again, confidence, because you're like buzzing off the energy of what's happening around about you. The pitch is there, you're running back, the boys' energy is like there, you can hear them, they're chatting, like, and that sort of energy sort of like generates from there to your next thing. And like, you take probably all this positive energy that's built up over that maybe only 45 second period, and the next job I have to do is me on the ball again to do that, and I'm like, I'm nailing this. Like, in your head, like, you've got all the same positive vibes are happening round about you, and you can see from what's happened in the last 2.5 minutes to them, they're the complete opposite, and they're retracting into their shells, they're scrambling. You're seeing pictures like, where am I kicking the ball, and you're scanning across the pitch and you can see the space here, that's the, like, and you have sort of these images in your head again. So you're probably right, and like, I can take in quite a lot from that moment.
Yeah.
Versus some moments where I can remember things going wrong, and again, I stick to probably my first game with Glasgow, and I go to something going wrong, and all I can remember is me stepping out and missing a boy. He goes inside me and he scores under the post, and that's all I can remember from that memory as such. So what you're saying is probably bang on, but something I haven't maybe thought of as much of with that. What I potentially think of is sometimes when I'm in like that situation there, I have time to think about it. But the question, I guess, as sports people, you often get asked is, how do you deal with the crowd? Like, how do you manage that? And like 9 times out of 10, if I'm in the zone and I'm playing, I couldn't tell you if there's one man there, 50,000 people there. Like, it's just one of those things. When you start playing, you kind of forget about it, because again, your mind's just focusing on the skill or whatever you're doing at that point. So. I think it's a little bit of both, I think, for me. That
makes sense. In terms of this question that I asked everybody that comes on, for you, being a rugby player, What percentage, if you could put a percentage on it, what percentage of performing at the level that you perform at is down to the physical side, the technical, the strengthening, the conditioning, and what do you think is the mental side? What percent do you think that kind of seesaw is of mental to physical in terms of how it impacts your performance, Robbie?
Yeah, it's interesting. So straight away for me, I was like, the way I play the game and what I am, I'm not the biggest, I'm not the quickest, I'm not the strongest. Like, I could go to the pub team down the road probably and find you guys that are in better shape than me potentially. But like for me, and what coaches say to me, oh, it's the speed of your mind, it's the speed of your thought, like that's what you're sort of here for. So for me, and I guess there is an element I can't say, like in my head I'm trying to say, oh, it's probably like 70% mental, 30% physical. But again, I do train every day almost within some sort of professional environment, so the physical is almost taken care of. Yeah. So I think in sport in general, obviously there's the physical side, but at elite sport, everyone's doing the same physical training. Everybody's lifting weights. Everybody's doing that. So for me to get to the top level, it's all the mental side of things, to be honest with you. I think that makes a difference. Everyone can lift the same numbers or lift bigger numbers or do this, do that. That doesn't necessarily transform onto the pitch. And I've seen it loads of times where boys can do it at a lower level, but come to the higher level and that something just doesn't click, and it should click, but it doesn't click. And that's where I think the mental side is so strong. And I think where the difference is in elite sport, do you know what I mean? Everyone's training, everyone's doing the same things, everyone's working really hard. I'd never question any of the boys' work rate, but what the difference between the best players and the other players is the top 2 inches probably for me. So I'd put it somewhere 70-30, I think, on the mental side of things for me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's surprising, a lot of athletes are saying that, 70-30, some are even saying 80-20. Obviously, I have some people who've come out have said that the lowest has been, I think, 50-50. There's no getting away from it. Yeah, if you're not physically good enough, if you don't have the skill level, if you don't have the physicality, if you're not strong enough, if you're not fast, if certain physical fundamentals for every single sport have to be there, and you can't get away from that. And I think with the work that I do and with this podcast, what I'm trying to get across to people is that it's the mental side that people need to start paying more attention to, and understanding that there are strategies, there are techniques, there are people out here now that can teach them things to help them advance themselves. And there's been numerous studies looking at this very notion. There's 3, if not 4 famous studies. One was done with lifting weights, one in basketball, one in playing at piano, and the 4th one eludes me at the moment. And essentially, they get groups of people together, and in those different disciplines, piano playing, doing weight training, and shooting basketball hoops, split into 2 groups. One of them for a month, 3 times a week, goes and physically does the thing, plays the piano 3 times a week for half an hour, lifts weights for half an hour, shoots baskets for half an hour 3 times a week, and they do that for a month, and then or whatever period of time it is, and then after that period of time, they come back. But whilst they've had the physical group practicing, they've had a second group who have not done one physical movement in that entire month. But what they have done is for half an hour, mentally practice playing the piano. They've visualized it. They've seen it. They've heard the sounds. They've felt the feelings of the keys touching the keyboards. The people lifting weights have imagined themselves picking up those dumbbells, hearing the sounds of their own voice, the sounds of the weights, the feeling of lifting it, and the same with the basketball. And then they've brought them back again and tested them, and both groups have improved. So what's the best advice that you've received, Robbie? Whether that be in terms of sport and rugby, or or with what you've gone through in life in general, has somebody ever said something to you that's kind of, you know, stuck with you, that's really helped you get, you know, a sense of perspective or motivation to keep chasing after your dreams and ambitions with rugby? Is there something that kind of stands out for you in any way?
Yeah, there's a few different things. I guess the biggest one, and this sounds really maybe dumb and simple, but people just like, you speak, rugby is just a game. Like, it is just a game. And although it is your job and everything else at the moment, like, it's easy to get caught up in a headspace where things can spiral. Like, and you go back to what you can speak about, and I had good discussions with boys, and people can get quite open about it. Like, why did you start playing rugby? Because I enjoy it. That's got to be the fundamental element to what I do. If I don't enjoy it, I don't do it with a smile on my face, then what are all the sacrifices sort of for? Like, why am I spending time away from my family? Why am I doing this sort of stuff? Like, and I had a really good chat with my wife at the moment, and it's like what my next moves are within rugby. And she's like, we want you to come home with a smile on your face, doing what you love, and we can deal with sacrifices as long as you're happy, because we get a happy person back at home as well. And that probably is the biggest advice I'd give to anyone, whether it's in sport life. Do what makes you happy. Don't chase money. Don't chase something that's not right for you. Like, you want to be a nice person in general, and what makes you happy will spiral into a happier life, which, when I've seen it in practice, has turned into, well, it can turn into wealth, it can turn into money, it can turn into anything. But that's the sort of biggest thing for me. Do what you enjoy and don't make it a chore.
100%. I couldn't agree anymore. And it's something that, again, that's really, really integral to the work that I do with athletes. It is making sure that they're enjoying what they're doing. You know, I don't. You can do almost anything when you're enjoying doing it. You know, if you can get to the point where you are enjoying whatever activity it is that you're doing, then it's not an effort. It's not a chore. And I think, you know, one of the things which does knock athletes out of their kind of flow of good performances, and when they get into a rut of not playing well, is when that, what I call that seesaw of pleasure and pain starts to change. As you said, when we all first start playing sport, it's 100% pleasure, isn't it? We just love playing this game, doing whatever activity or sport. We're doing it for the love of playing and enjoyment, being with your mates, having fun. You found that you're good at something, and then as you start to go up that performance ladder, and sometimes it's your own doing, and often it's the doing of coaches and being part of certain environments, that pressure increases, and as pressure increases and a couple of bad performances come along, it all of a sudden can go from being this thing that you love to do, and then it starts to become more painful. You know, the memories of mistakes, the memories of not quite meeting expectations in some way. And as soon as that shift goes too much towards pain, as soon as playing sport or performing in sport becomes more painful than pleasurable, that's when that's when performance goes. Because without the pleasure, without the joy of doing what you're doing, it's not enough to get through the hard times, is it?
No, that's literally it. You end up questioning when you're playing badly, like, why am I doing this? What's going on? And that's when it's like quite useful. Like, a lot of what we do now is we speak about, like, in our group, we'll speak about like my why, like, why do you do what you're doing? And it's quite refreshing to go back sometimes and find that, like, you have it written down or you have it somewhere, and you'll have bad days and you'll forgetting about it. Like you say, the more that goes that way, the joy side of things comes down. It's quite refreshing sometimes to go back to that and be like, okay, why do I actually do this? And like, what are the reasons for it? And sometimes that can just be a quick reminder, a glance at a sheet, a look at something on your phone, and you're like, actually, I am good at this. Like, I enjoy this. This is what it's about. It can be a memory. from a trip you've been on with the boys. It can be so many different things that trigger that joy maybe to come back up. And it is for me having another sort of strategy. You have these things on your phone, like you have clips of you doing things well, you have memories of trips away with the boys, you have pictures of celebrating victories, you have these sorts of things round about, like all add to that, like joy, the good times, because then that makes the pain sometimes worth it. And it does keep that balance, because it is easy. And I'm sure every sportsman's done it. Like you do get into that zone where you're like, why am I doing this? What are we doing this for? And that can come through injuries, that can come through dark days doing rehab. I mean, when you're not getting the joy of what you want, when you're doing that sort of stuff. So yeah, no, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, and you said something there which again I just think is so useful for any athlete. Use your own resources that you've got. You've got memories of playing really well. These days, almost everybody has videos, of themselves playing. Get a collection of videos and edit it into like 5-6 minutes of yourself playing really well, doing these great things, and watch it. Before you go and play, or days before you go and play, get your mind to remember like how good you really are and how much enjoyment you're getting from these things. And literally take some time. If you have a journal or something like this, write down your top 10 best memories from your sport. And keep building from that. Keep ingraining into your mind the positive, pleasurable experiences that you had, and the positive, reasons why you're doing what you're doing, and focusing on, again, the positives of what you're doing, focusing on what you want to happen, as opposed to letting the pain of the past take over your thoughts and thinking. You've got to beat it. You've got to flip that gear into sixth gear, going towards what you want, reminding yourself what you're good at, and how well that you are capable of playing.
Yeah, no, spot on. Yeah, it's always good. And we always say it, like coaches will try and pump your tires up before a game. They'll try and, they'll tell you how good they are, they'll tell you how great they are, and things like that. And for me, that's great. But to have it in your own head beforehand is the most powerful method.
Definitely. I've got an idea what your answer might be to this question, Robbie, but I'm intrigued to see if it is different. What's your number one superpower? I believe we all have skills. We all have what I'm calling in this context a superpower, something that sets you apart from others in some way, something that's helped enabled you to either get to where you've got to, or something that enables you to keep performing at a high level. And this could be like a particular skill within your sport, so something that you do specifically that's to a high level, or it could be a mental thing, or it could be a trait, or it could be a habit. What would be your superpower?
I've probably touched on it already, yeah, but it's probably going down the lines of resilience, persistence, sort of that never give up sort of mentality, whether that's running on a pitch or whatever that sort of is probably where I'm at with it. Like I'll stick things out probably longer than the most person. You have that sort of voice in your head where like you're getting told, oh, I'm knackered, I can't do any more. And you've got to have that voice in your head. But if I'm knackered, he's got to be more knackered than me. Like you've just got to have that mentality that like this is it, I'm going to outlast this or whatever that is. I guess for me that would be it. And I think that's probably driven by a hatred for losing. I hate losing. I hate losing. So it's one of probably what drives that.
Awesome, Robbie. Awesome. I think it's something that often is missing in people, that just desire, that tenacity to keep going, and it's certainly, as we've said, and from people that yourself, and from all of the research that I've done, some of the greatest athletes across the sports, that they have had serious setbacks. you only have to look at someone like Michael Jordan, who was told he's not even good enough for his high school basketball team at 16. So if you can be told you're not good enough at 16 and then go on and become arguably the greatest basketball player of all time, then the rest of us don't have an excuse, because he could have stopped there. He could have stopped there without that resilience, without that desire to prove, I'm guessing, his coach wrong, and then to go, from reading his autobiography, he spent the entire summer. There just was not a day where he was not giving 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day throughout his entire summer, so that he could come back to start school in a couple of months' time and prove this guy wrong. So it is a resource that all of us as people, whether it's in sport or life, we just have to have it, because nobody knows what's around the corner. Recently, my dad passed away, and you don't know when things like that are going to happen. You don't know what other things are going to come along the way. And we've all got to find a way of getting up each day, moving forwards, and finding the positives from life, and looking for the positives that haven't even occurred yet, but that could come as long as you keep going. So, I think you can't ask for a greater superpower than the resilience, Robbie, I don't think, because it sets you up for everything else which can possibly come with that.
Yeah, no, well, I think that would potentially be where it's at. And it's one thing you sort of say to someone, it's like, you can easily say, if you want it hard enough, it can kind of happen. But like, I'm obviously aware that like there's limitations within that and with people there, but I'm always kind of one of those people, if I know I've given it 100 and I've given it my best, if that's not good enough, you can live with it, can't you? You can always live with knowing that you've done that. If you give up at the first hurdle or the second hurdle or whatever, like, you're going to get knocked down, you're going to get injuries, you're going to get things like that happen. It is about how you kind of come back, probably, that defines you as a person and a character a little bit as well.
Definitely. My last question for you, Robbie. What's your definition or meaning of sporting excellence? What does sporting excellence and achieving sporting excellence, what does this term mean to you?
Achieving sporting excellence, that's, to me, you kind of come to being the best in your field, almost like competing at that top level. For me, winning tournaments, winning medals is what I perceive sporting excellence. But I guess under a higher, that's probably the top end of a pyramid of things that builds underneath it. It can be each individual achieving their goal, whatever that may be. So it could be to my mates who don't play rugby, it could be being able to run a 5K in under 20 minutes. Like, I think it's relative to what you set as sporting excellence in your mind. So for me, it's now going to be competing at the top level and trying to win medals in rugby and pushing for another Olympic Games. Whereas to someone down the road, it could be, like I say, run a 5K in under 20 minutes or whatever that is. So I think it's relative to you as a person. And there's no point of your average Joe having, I want to be an Olympic swimmer when he's never trained for it. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's not relevant to him. But for me, it's all relative to you as a person and what that means for you. But yeah, for me, sporting excellence now is, I've done this, I'm at a stage in my career now where I'm ready to win things, do things, and sporting excellence is winning medals and performing at the highest level for me.
Awesome. That's a fantastic answer, Robbie, and a fantastic way of rounding this podcast up. And I just want to finish with, thanking you for coming on and giving up your time. I found it, so insightful listening to you talk about how you have, largely figured out so many really powerful kind of strategies and techniques and processes that have helped keep picking yourself up when life has been knocking you down, in sport and outside of sport. And, to me, you're just a prime example of somebody who certainly is like obviously thought about things when things haven't gone the way that you've wanted it to go. You've not shied away from kind of going inside yourself and asking some questions, you know, and getting some answers from that. And it seems like you've from what was such a, you know, a challenging, what would have been at that time a dark moment in your life, you've been able to take so much from it and use it as fuel to drive you almost to a level that you may not have got to if it didn't happen. And I just think your story, your what you've gone through is so inspiring for all of us and for anybody watching. So, you know, thanks a lot, Robbie. I've loved it, every second of this. It really has been great.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me on. It's nice just to have a chat and go through things and actually put some science behind some of what I just kind of, I guess, adopt. And I just think it's a good way. Like, I think I could have achieved more as younger and maybe potentially more in my career if I'd had some of this stuff when I was 15, 16. Like the most simple coping things can sometimes, it takes you 20, 30 minutes to listen to something and hear something like your podcast. And it can go a long way to helping a young sportsman's career, probably more than spending 10 hours on a pitch doing something. Like, getting control of your mind, and it's going to be a massive, massive part of things, and it's invaluable.
Definitely. Well, thanks again, Robbie. It's been a real pleasure, and it's been fantastic, you know, getting to know you and meeting you. So thank you very much, and all the best. I'll certainly be keeping my eye out for you, watching you on TV. Hopefully get to see you at the next Olympics and doing great things with Glasgow and achieving things with them, and maybe breaking into, I don't know if that's an aspiration of yours, trying to get into that 15-a-side game, or if you're just sticking with a 7-a-side. But either way, I'll certainly be keeping a keen interest and eye on your progress, Robin. I wish you all the best for the future, buddy.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Cheers, Robbie.
The Inner Game Podcast, brought to you by the Science of Excellence. Unleash your power. Book your free consultation now.